In this video, we're going over the category herbs that regulate the qi. First, we'll talk about what it means to regulate qi. Then we'll go over the individual herbs in this category. And finally, we'll just introduce a few formulas where these herbs pop up. If you want to follow along, you can download the slides or download the flashcards. There are links to those below. And there you'll also find a practice test you can take afterwards. And this video is brought to you by students like you. To everyone who supports the YouTube channel and the website tcmstudy.net, thank you. If you've been getting value out of these videos and would like to give something back, consider joining the Patreon or making a one-time donation through Buy Me a Coffee. There are links to those below, but let's go ahead and get into herbs that regulate the qi. So these are herbs that regulate the qi. What do we mean by regulating qi? Well, here this means two things. Number one, we want to make sure that the qi is moving, as in it's not stagnant. And number two, we want to make sure that the qi is moving in the proper direction. So if you remember in fundamentals, different organ systems have different directions associated with them. The lung has a function of depurative downbearing. When we breathe in the qi of the air, the lung is supposed to send that qi downwards. In the middle jiao, the spleen has an upward direction. It raises the clear, but the stomach has a downward direction. It's supposed to downbear food into the small intestine because that's the direction of digestion. For the liver generally moves upward, but it's also supposed to spread outwards, spreading qi into the limbs. Remember that the liver belongs to the wood phase, and when we say wood, we actually mean a tree. So trees grow upwards, but they also spread their branches outwards, and that's the direction of the liver. So there are certain situations when the qi can start moving in the opposite direction that it's supposed to, and we call that rebellious qi. So if the lung qi moves upwards instead of downwards, that presents as cough. If the stomach qi rebels upwards instead of moving downwards, we might see nausea, vomiting, hiccup, or belching. And the liver is a little bit weird because the liver already has an upward direction, and if anything, the liver moves upwards too much, and we call that liver yang rising or hyperactive ascent of liver yang. But what can happen is the liver fails in its function of free coursing and it no longer spreads the qi outward. So we have like cold hands and feet because the liver is not spreading outwards. We might call that rebellion or counterflow. But that's what we're dealing with in this category. To put it another way, these herbs treat two conditions. They treat qi stagnation and rebellious qi. And these two kind of go together. If the qi stagnates, it might eventually start to rebel upwards or move in the opposite direction. Like, think about a toilet that gets clogged or a sink that the drain pipe gets clogged. The actual clog would be the stagnation. The water can no longer move. But if you keep trying to flush water down there, it's eventually going to start to come back up. And so the same thing happens, like if the qi gets stuck in the middle jiao, it will eventually start rebelling back upwards. So when we get into our slides, we can kind of recap everything that we just said. And if you're a little bit nerdy and you like to know the Chinese terms for things, here they are. So when we talk about regulating qi, the conditions we're treating are qi zhi, qi stagnation, as in the qi is not moving, or qi ni, rebellious qi or counterflow qi, as in the qi is moving in the opposite direction that it's supposed to. And the way we treat this is we use herbs that regulate qi to regulate the qi or rectify the qi. And this means one or two things. We can move the qi, xing qi, or we can descend the qi or downbear the qi, jiang qi. So these are some of the terms we'll see pop up when we start talking about the actions of these herbs. If we wanted to get a little bit deeper and maybe a little bit more nerdy, when we talk about the qi not moving, we can say qi zhi, as in qi stagnation, but another term we might see pop up is qi yu, which Wiseman translates as qi depression or depressed liver qi, or Bensky uses the term qi constraint. And this is just referring to a specific type of stagnation that's due to the liver failing in its function of free coursing or failing in its function of dredging and draining the channels. So this is a type of qi stagnation that's a little bit more systemic or all over the body. So if I had elbow pain, for example, I might say that there's qi stagnation in the yang ming channel, and that would be qi zhi or qi stagnation. But when you say qi yu, we're really talking more like the qi of the entire body becomes sluggish, and that's due to the liver not doing its job. So I just like to bring this up because sometimes people will ask, what's the difference between qi constraint and qi stagnation? Or they'll see this Wiseman term and they'll be like, what do we mean by depressed qi? Does that mean that the qi is sad and it can't get out of bed and get moving in the morning? And it's like, no, when we say depressed qi, we mean that the qi is pressed down, it's constrained, and that's because the liver is not doing its job properly. So that's another term we might see pop up. When we're treating this depressed qi or qi constraint, we usually say we course the qi, we course liver qi, or we relieve constraint. And when we start talking about treatment, we can say that we move the qi or descend the qi, or another thing we might see is pull qi, to break the qi or break up qi stagnation. And really, this is kind of the same as moving qi. It's just much stronger in its action. So a lot of times I think about the Kool-Aid man bursting through a brick wall and shouting, "Oh yeah." That's kind of the mental image I have for breaking the qi. So it's the same as moving qi. It's just much more forceful, much stronger in action. So that's another term we might see pop up as we go through these herbs. So what kind of qi can we regulate? Well, basically the ones that we already talked about. We can regulate qi in the middle jiao for spleen stomach qi stagnation or rebellious qi. We can regulate liver qi for liver qi stagnation, or we can regulate the lung qi. So we talk about regulating qi in the middle jiao. If we have middle jiao qi stagnation, we might see things like abdominal fullness, distension, and pain. That all that stuff is stuck there, so you feel distension and pain. We can have gas and bloating, which is kind of the same as distension. Like all this stuff is stuck there. It starts fermenting. You get bloated and feel distended. We can have vomiting, nausea, and belching. When this qi gets stuck, it might start to rebel back upwards. And so vomiting, nausea, belching, acid reflux, these are all examples of things moving in the opposite direction. We can also have loss of appetite. If all this stuff is stuck here, the spleen can't do its job of movement and transformation, so you don't feel hungry. And then we say constipation or diarrhea. And it's kind of like these are two opposite things. How can it be both? It kind of depends. Sometimes if the qi is stuck and things aren't moving, then you'll feel stuck and feel constipated. But sometimes when things get stuck in the middle jiao, that dampness can start forming, and then you might have diarrhea. So with middle jiao qi stagnation, it can go either way, depending. You can have constipation or diarrhea. When we talk about regulating liver qi, for liver qi stagnation, we can see things like headache, rib side pain, or a stifling sensation in the chest because the liver channel goes to the chest and rib sides. We can have depression or irritability, that the liver is about anger, and so you can think about anger, irritability, or depressed emotions. This can kind of go both ways, that if the liver qi is stagnant, you can have emotional issues, but also emotional issues can cause liver qi stagnation, so it kind of goes both ways, kind of chicken and an egg thing. And then also very common to see irregular menses or breast tenderness, because the liver channel goes to the lower jiao and has a lot to do with menstruation, but also the liver channel goes to the breast. So this is a very common sign for liver qi stagnation. So basically, if you have a patient with a lot of sharp stabbing pain and clots, that might be more indicative of blood stasis, where if you have more like cramping pain, diffuse pain, and especially breast tenderness, that might point more towards liver qi stagnation. A lot of times people end up with both. When we talk about lung qi stagnation, we can say cough, wheezing, or shortness of breath. Honestly, I think the term lung qi stagnation is a little bit weird. It's not something we use a lot. Oftentimes we'll say something like non-diffusion of lung qi. And what we mean there is it's not like the lung qi itself gets stuck. Usually there's some other pathogen in there. So we have like a wind cold pathogen gets into the lung and it blocks the diffusion of lung qi. And so the lung can't spread the qi or performance action of depurative downbearing. Or we have phlegm in the lung, and that phlegm blocks the diffusion of lung qi, and so the qi starts rebelling back upwards. So I feel like that's a more common term you might see is non-diffusion of lung qi or non-dissemination of lung qi. And it turns out this one we don't really address in this category. Like we said, we have a separate category of herbs that relieve coughing and wheezing, and those were the herbs that were dealing with non-diffusion of lung qi or rebellious lung qi. So those are just in a separate category. In this category, we're more dealing with the first two. So either middle jiao qi stagnation or liver qi stagnation. And this is just a repeat of that slide, but I wanted to remind myself to mention that, yeah, we say herbs in this category tend to be warm, acrid, and drying, so be careful about that. But also, herbs in this category may relieve pain by moving qi. So maybe you've heard of this saying in Chinese, bu tong zi tong, tong zi bu tong, which means where there's lack of free flow, there's pain. Where there's pain, there's lack of free flow. And so it's kind of like stagnation equals pain. So it's very common that if we have qi stagnation, that we'll have some sort of pain like headache, ribside pain, abdominal pain. And so by moving the qi, by relieving or breaking up that stagnation, that will alleviate the pain. So that's something we'll also see in this category is many of these herbs have a pain relieving action as well because they move the qi. So when we look at the properties of the herbs in terms of taste, these herbs can be acrid in taste because the acrid flavor moves and disperses. They can be aromatic, especially the ones that are good for the middle jiao tend to be aromatic in nature. And so we can think that it's awakening the spleen so it can perform its function of movement and transformation. Remember, movement is part of the spleen as well, so they might be aromatic. And then some of the herbs are also bitter, not necessarily because they clear heat or dry dampness, but just remember the bitter flavor has a downward direction, and so that's what we're using to treat the rebellious qi. I think we saw the same thing in the category herbs that relieve coughing and wheezing, like xingren has a bitter flavor because it redirects qi downward to treat that rebellious qi. So those are the ones we might see: acrid, aromatic if it goes to the middle jiao, and bitter if we're dealing with rebellious qi. In terms of temperature, many of these herbs are warm in temperature, but some of them are not. So that's something that we'll want to pay attention to, that most of them are warm in temperature, but we do have a few that are cool or cold in temperature, and that makes them stand out. So that's something we'll want to pay attention to. In terms of entering channels, these either enter the spleen and stomach channels if they're dealing with middle jiao qi stagnation, or they enter the liver gallbladder channels if we're dealing with liver qi stagnation. So whichever type of qi we're regulating, those are the channels that we enter. The action of these herbs is they regulate or rectify qi for qi stagnation or rebellious qi. Hopefully that makes sense by now. Cautions and contraindications we want to pay attention to. Number one, these herbs are very warm, acrid, and drying, so they may cause heat signs or damage the yin. Basically, they're warm, so if you give someone too much, they might start developing heat. The aromatic acrid tends to be drying, so be careful if the patient already has yin deficiency, or if you're using these long term, you might inadvertently dry the patient out. The other thing is these herbs disperse qi, so use caution in cases of deficiency. So basically we're using the acrid flavor to move and disperse stagnation, but we have to be careful that we don't end up dispersing the upright qi. Sometimes an analogy we would use sometimes is like, think about when you move qi, it's like revving the engine on a car. So you don't want to rev the engine if you don't have enough oil. You'll actually cause damage. And so that's kind of the same thing here. If we try to strongly move the qi when the person doesn't have enough qi to begin with, that's going to cause problems. You might stir up wind or deplete the qi even more. So that's another thing we have to be careful about is with qi deficiency. So especially when you talk about the herbs that break the qi, that's something we'll want to be careful of. Another one we should mention here is some of these herbs we have to use caution in cases of pregnancy. That they're not outright contraindicated, but some of these herbs, because they're treating rebellious qi, they have a strong downward direction. So you need to use caution in cases of pregnancy. So here we have our list of herbs. It looks kind of long, but some of these are actually kind of related, so we can go through them quickly. And then there are a couple more not listed here that we'll talk about at the end. But anyway, our first herb here is Chen P. Citri reticulati pericarpium. Chen P. Citri reticulati pericarpium. And this is aged tangerine peel. So the skin of a tangerine that we dry out and let it age. I think it gets more potent as we let it age. But anyway, Chen P regulates middle jiao qi and strengthens the spleen for all of those things we talked about, like abdominal fullness, distension and pain, gas and bloating. But Chen P is especially useful for nausea and vomiting. So when that qi gets stuck in the middle jiao and starts to rebel back upwards, we can use Chen P. Notice that Chen P is acrid in flavor to disperse the qi, but it also has a bitterness to send things downward to deal with that rebellious qi. Besides regulating the qi, Chen P also dries dampness and transforms phlegm. So again, that bitter flavor has a drying quality to it. So this could be phlegm in the lung, so it's good for cough due to phlegm damp, or this could be dampness in the middle jiao, as in dampness obstructing the spleen and stomach for abdominal distension, loss of appetite, loose stools, and a thick, greasy coat. So Chen P, it turns out, is a really good all-around herb for the spleen. Remember, we said that the spleen has a function of movement and transformation. So Chen P is taking care of both of these things. It's strengthening the spleen, it's helping to move the qi, and it's helping to transform the dampness. We also say that the spleen is the source of phlegm and the lung is the house or the container of phlegm. And it turns out that Chen P goes to both of those areas to treat the phlegm. So Chen P is also a really good phlegm herb as well. We look at these notes at the bottom. First, this one is kind of funny. It says, in practice, Chen P's dosage is usually limited to 3 to 6 grams due to its unpleasant taste. That was a note from my Chinese teacher. I'm not sure if that's really true, but I think it's kind of funny because to Americans, all Chinese herbs have an unpleasant taste. So it's not like using a large dosage of Chen P. I don't think that's going to make a difference to the American palate. I think no matter what you use, the patient is always going to say your herbs taste bad, but that's kind of a funny note, so I left it in there. Then we also say Chen P can be used to prevent stagnation from certain tonifying herbs that are very sticky and cloying. So I think we talked about this before when we talked about sha ren, cardamom, or amomi fructus, that sometimes when we use tonifying herbs, they're very sweet and they can be sticky and cloying, and they can very easily cause stagnation in the middle jiao. So sometimes as a preventative measure, we might use certain herbs like sha ren or Chen P, which move the qi and prevent stagnation, or we can say they help digest those herbs. That's also like if we're trying to tonify qi, we don't just want to tonify the qi and have it sit there. Once we tonify the qi, we want to make sure that it's moving. So we might use herbs like Chen P to make sure that it keeps moving. So that's Chen P. The name means aged peel. Next is Juhong Citri reticulati exocarpium rubrum. Juhong Citri reticulati exocarpium rubrum. This is red tangerine peel. This is specifically the outer layer of the tangerine. So with Chen P, when we looked at that picture, you can see there's the peel, but then when you flip it over, there's that white stuff in there too, because it's the entire peel. With Juhong, it's just that outer layer, the red part, without that white stuff in the middle. You can maybe think that exocarpium refers to the outer layer and rubrum means red. So Juhong is pretty much the same as Chen P. It's just that it's warmer and drier in nature. So I feel like this is used regionally. It's like in certain parts of eastern China and in Sichuan, they might be more likely to use Juhong. But I think in most of our formulas, we tend to just use the Chen P version of things. There are some formulas where the original ingredients will say use Juhong, but then in the footnote, it will just say substitute Chen P. So I think nowadays, you might see Juhong in your clinic, but when it comes to formulas, we pretty much always use Chen P. But just the difference between these two, they're both from tangerine, but Juhong is the outer red layer, and it's warmer and drier and better at transforming dampness and phlegm, and Chen Pi, where Chen Pi might be a little bit more moderate. So that's Ju Hong. The name means tangerine red. After that is Qing Pi, Citri reticulati veride pericarpium. Qing Pi, Citri reticulati veride pericarpium. This is green tangerine peel, or an unripe tangerine before it turns orange or red. It's green, and so maybe you can think that the Latin name veride means green, like in Spanish or French. Vert. Trying to remember what it is in Spanish. Anyway, veride sounds like green, so this is green tangerine peel. And that's important to know because remember, green is the color of wood, green is the color of the liver, and Qing Pi strongly moves liver qi. We can say, when we say strongly moves, we can say it breaks the qi. So it's that very strong movement of moving liver qi. So with Chen Pi, more about the middle jiao, the spleen and stomach. Qing Pi, because it's green in color, is definitely used for liver qi stagnation. So this could be for pain and distension in the chest, rib sides, and breast, because that's where the liver channel goes to the rib sides and chest. Or it can be used for Shan disorder, which is a hernia type pain. So think about the liver channel also goes to the inguinal area and lower abdomen as well. And then Qing Pi, like we said, because it breaks the qi, that's a very strong action. Sometimes it can be too strong. So this can be too warm, too drying, or its action of moving the qi can almost be too strong. So we have to be careful and monitor that closely. We also say that Qing Pi resolves stagnation and clumps, and this is part of its breaking the qi, its strong movement. So it's for severe food stagnation, it can break through that and push it through, or for masses and nodules. This is something we'll talk about a little bit more in the regulate blood category, that qi and blood stagnation can cause certain nodules to form, especially in the abdomen, and so Qing Pi can, because it breaks the qi, it can break up those clumps and masses. So that's another action of Qing Pi, referring to its strong action of breaking the qi. And so Qing Pi, the name means green peel. Qing is a color that means green. So here I would think that Qing means green. This is green peel. Green is the color of the liver. Hopefully that can help you remember that Qing Pi is for liver qi stagnation, and it strongly breaks up the qi stagnation. After that is Zhi Shi Auranti fructus immaturis. Zhi Shi Auranti fructus immaturis, and this is unripe bitter orange. So you can see so far we're dealing with a lot of citrusy things like oranges and tangerines. So this is the unripe bitter orange. And so this is another one that it breaks the qi and reduces accumulation. So this moves qi, but it's very strong in its action of moving qi. And we specifically say this one moves the qi downward in direction. So remember, this is bitter orange. It's obviously bitter in flavor, and the bitter flavor moves things downward. So Zhi Shi moves downward in direction for constipation. It's actually it's common that we might combine Zhi Shi with certain purgative herbs. So like Da Huang and Zhi Shi are often used together to treat constipation because they both have a strong downward action and move things and even break up the qi. So this is also for epigastric or abdominal pain or food accumulation because it's moving things downward. Zhi Shi also transforms phlegm, so kind of a common theme here with our citrusy things for chest and epigastric distension due to phlegm obstruction in the chest. And then kind of a modern application is we can say that Zhi Shi can raise low blood pressure, and they've done certain studies on this in China, and I think they only use this in IV form, that if a person had low blood pressure, Zhi Shi could raise it, which is kind of interesting. I'm not sure we would ever use that here in America. But also I think there's some modern studies that say it's good for angina pain and things like that, part of opening up the chest. So that's Zhi Shi. We should also know that Zhi Shi, because it has that strong downward direction, it doesn't just move the qi, it breaks the qi and it moves downward. That means we should use caution during pregnancy, that we don't want so much downward motion that it moves the baby right out. So that's Zhi Shi Aronti fructus immaturis, which is unripe bitter orange. Next we have Jurke Aronti fructus. Jurke Aronti fructus, and this is ripe bitter orange. Or if it's not ripe, it's at least more ripe than Jurshur. So Jurke, it's more ripe, so it basically does the same things as Jurshur. It's just not as strong in its action. So we still say it regulates middle jiao qi, but it's a little bit more mild because it's not the unripe version. It's not quite as bitter, so it's not quite as strong as in its actions. But we also do say it expands the chest. That was something we said about Jurshur and transforming phlegm, and it expands the chest. We might say that Jurke is even better at expanding the chest. And then it can also be used for a cough, abdominal distension, and constipation by regulating the qi and moving downward because it's still bitter in flavor. So here we say Jurke is similar to Jurshur, but it's much milder and safer to use, so the action isn't quite as drastic. We don't say it breaks up the qi the same way that Jurshur does, but even though it's more mild and safer to use, according to Bensky, we should still use caution in cases, caution for pregnancy. So that's Jurshur and Jurke. So the way I remember these is one, Jurshur, in the Latin name, it says immaturis. So that means it's not yet ripe. It's not yet matured. And so that means it's more bitter in flavor. So it's stronger. But main difference there is Jurshur is stronger. But we could also say, if we wanted to make a difference, that some commentator will say that Jurke works more on the upper body, so it's better for expanding the chest, whereas Jurshur works lower down, so it's better for things like constipation. So that's maybe one thing you can think of. But really, I would think that Jurshur has an S in it. That means it's stronger in its action. And also, Jurshur is the one that, because of its strong downward direction, it's good for constipation. So Jurshur makes you poop. So that's Jurshur versus Jurke, bitter orange, and unripe bitter orange. Next is Da Fu Pi Arecae pericarpium. Da Fu Pi Arecae pericarpium, and this is betel nut husk. That later we'll learn in herb Bing Long, which is the betel nut. It's the thing inside here. Da Fu Pi is the husk around that nut. So Arecae pericarpium. So Da Fu Pi moves middle jiao qi, and again directs qi downward in terms of its movement. It has a downward direction, and it's good for gas and bloating, or especially incomplete bowel movements. And so this is a thing that sometimes we ask our patients when we do go through the 10 questions and talk about stool. Sometimes people will say they have incomplete bowel movements, as in they go to the bathroom, but it feels like not everything came out, like there's still something in there and they just can't get it out. So we might use something like Da Fu Pi to create movement, to create downward movement in that situation. And then we also say that Da Fu Pi promotes urination, especially for superficial edema or edema under the skin. So we can say Da Fu Pi makes you pee, or this is a kind of a common thing we've seen before where this is the P means skin or peel or bark. So this is the outer layer, the outer husk of that betel nut. Since it's the skin of that nut, it's good for the skin of your body or edema under the skin. So I think we've seen that pop up before with things like Fuling versus Fuling P is the skin of Fuling, so it's good for edema under the skin. Songbai P is the skin of mulberry root, so it's the skin of mulberry, so it's good for edema under the skin. Shengjiang P is the skin of ginger, so it's good for edema under the skin. So here we have another one, that Da Fu Pi makes you pee. It's the skin of Bing Long, so it's good for edema under the skin. And this is another one that we say it has that downward direction, so we need to use caution during pregnancy. Next is Xiang Fu Cyperrhizoma. Xiang Fu Cyperrhizoma. This is an important one. Xiang Fu, first of all, regulates liver qi, especially for pain in the rib sides or pain in the abdomen. But also the specialty of Xiang Fu is that it regulates menstruation and alleviates pain. Now, really, I would say that this function falls under the category of regulating liver qi because the liver channel goes to the lower jiao. The liver has something to do with menstruation, so it makes sense that by regulating liver qi, we would regulate menstruation and alleviate pain. But it turns out that Xiangfu is so good at this, its action is so famous, we list it as a separate function. So Xiangfu regulates menstruation and alleviates pain for irregular menses, painful menses, or breast distension. I think we talked about this before, that the liver channel goes to the lower jiao, but it also goes to the rib sides and goes to the breasts. So this would be kind of a very common sign of liver qi stagnation in women before the period. If they feel some breast tenderness, that might be a sign that they have some liver qi stagnation. And this is, Xiangfu is very famously used for women's health conditions or OBGYN conditions. So I think we could definitely say that's the specialty of Xiangfu. I guess the other thing that makes it stand out here is we have this note down here that most of the herbs in this category are warm in temperature, but Xiangfu is actually neutral or even slightly cool in temperature. And so that's another thing that makes it stand out. Number one, because liver qi stagnation often leads to heat. So it's nice that we have an herb that's neutral or cool in temperature, but also that means it's safer for long-term use. So that with some of those other herbs like qingpi, we might have to worry that it's too warm, too drying. Over time, it might damage yin or things like that. Whereas Xiangfu, because it's neutral in temperature, we can use it a little bit more long-term. And then I also have a note down here that even though it's used for menstruation problems and pain, Xiangfu does not move blood. And I think this is just something that people tend to get confused about when they see regulates menstruation and alleviates pain. They might think of blood, and they might think that Xiangfu also has an action of invigorating blood. And it turns out, no, it does not. Xiangfu only moves qi. It does not move blood. And I think it's just, I had a teacher who very often asked this question, and so many students got it wrong that I started very specifically pointing out that Xiangfu does not, in fact, move blood. It does treat menstruation problems, but only by moving qi. So that's Xiangfu. This is a very commonly used one, a very important one to know. So remember that Xiangfu moves liver qi. Its specialty is in treating women's health conditions or OBGYN conditions, and it's neutral in temperature. So those are the things that make Xiangfu stick out. Mu Xiang Oaklandii radix. Mu Xiang Oaklandii radix. Mu Xiang regulates middle jiao qi and stops pain. So that's the specialty of this one. If we want to look for something that stands out, Mu Xiang goes to the middle jiao and is especially useful for stopping pain. So this is for abdominal distension and pain due to qi stagnation. When it comes to regulating qi, we can also say that it regulates liver qi or liver gallbladder qi as well. And we will see this pop up in a few formulas where it's more of a liver qi thing, but I think it tends to be that the liver qi is overacting on the spleen. Basically, I tend to think of Mu Xiang more as a spleen stomach herb, but it does have this action of also regulating liver qi as well. So in regulating liver qi, it's good for rib side pain and soreness. But then something that's also interesting here is we also say it moves large intestine qi stagnation, which is not something we really talked about or something we see very often. So it moves large intestine qi stagnation for stagnation in the large intestine, transforming into damp heat. And so this would be like diarrhea, dysentery, and tenesmus. Tenesmus, I had one teacher who described tenesmus as like the dry heaves of the anus, which is kind of a funny mental image. But tenesmus, it's diarrhea. It's often painful diarrhea. And then we say there's this sensation that even after you empty the bowels, you feel like you have to urgently go again right away, even if there might not be anything there. But so it's like it's diarrhea and you go and then you immediately feel like you have to go again. So that's tenesmus. But kind of the idea here is, remember when we talked about constipation, one of the patterns of constipation is if qi stagnates, then the stool can't move through the large intestine. So if qi stagnates, the stool's not moving, that can eventually fester into damp heat in the large intestine and cause things like diarrhea and dysentery. So this is kind of an interesting action here, that it also moves qi through the large intestine as well. if you have things like constipation due to qi stagnation, or more likely it's transforming into damp heat. So that's Mu Xiang, but overall I would think of this more as a spleen stomach herb. You also say Mu Xiang is very warm and very drying, so this is another one that we might want to use caution in case for patients with yin deficiency, or if we're using it over a long period of time, we want to make sure that we don't dry out the patient too much. And then Mu Xiang is also used to prevent stagnation for tonifying herbs. So I think these are the main ones that we've learned so far for that we see used to prevent stagnation with sticky and cloying herbs. We had Sha Ren, Amomi fructus, the cardamom seed. We had Chen Pi, aged tangerine peel, and now we have Mu Xiang, Oaklandia radix. Those are the very common ones we add to formulas to prevent stagnation from tonifying herbs, either tonifying qi or tonifying blood. Those can be sticky and cloying and cause stagnation. So Mu Xiang and those other herbs will prevent that. Mu Xiang, I forgot to put it here, but the name Mu Xiang means wood fragrance. The word xiang actually means aromatic or fragrant. And so even though we don't list this as aromatic in property, it turns out a lot of times some of our source texts don't actually list things as aromatic in their taste and temperature. It would just, when it discusses the herb, then it would say it's aromatic. So the fact that we don't actually say it's aromatic in the taste and temperatures, we could still say it's aromatic because the word aromatic is in the name. But maybe you can remember Mu Xiang means wood fragrance or tree fragrance. So it's good for moving liver qi, and the aromatic thing can maybe make you think of the spleen and stomach. But for Mu Xiang, I would think of regulating middle jiao qi and especially stopping pain. Next is Wu Yao Lindera radix. Wu Yao Lindera radix. Wu Yao regulates qi, but it's good for regulating all kinds of qi. So it moves middle jiao qi, it moves liver qi, and it also stops pain. So by moving stagnation, it can relieve pain. But something we should probably know about Wu Yao is besides moving qi, it's also warm in temperature. So we say it warms the interior and warms the channels, so it's good for stagnation with cold or stagnation due to cold. So when we say it warms the interior and warms the channels, we can say it warms the liver channel, especially for hernia pain, Shan disorder, or painful menses. So like we said, the liver channel comes up the leg, it goes to the inguinal area, and then it goes to the lower jiao. So if we have cold stagnating in the liver channel, it's very common to have things like painful menses, or hernia pain or Shan disorder is often cold stagnation in the liver channel. So Wu Yao is especially good for that because it's warming the channel and also moving the qi. We can also say that Wu Yao warms the UB or warms the kidney for urinary frequency or incontinence due to kidney yang deficiency. So those are the warming actions. Wu Yao means, Wu means black or dark. I think it actually means like crow or raven, so it's referring to the color of those birds, but we translate it as dark or black. I think it's the same character when we talk about oolong tea, as in black tea. Wu means dark, yao just means medicinal. So when we talk about Chinese herbs, it's zhong yao. Yao just means herb or medicinal, so Wu Yao is dark medicinal. I remember that it regulates qi, but it also warms the interior, warms the channel, and Wu Yao is especially good for treating Shan disorder or hernia pain. So that's Wu Yao. Next is Qian Xiang Aquilaria lignum resinatum. Qian Xiang Aquilaria lignum resinatum. This is not, I don't think this is a very commonly used herb, but we should probably know that it regulates middle jiao qi, especially for stagnation due to coldness. So again, this is one that's warm in temperature, so it's good for stagnation due to coldness, and it also stops pain, and it moves downward in direction for hiccuping, belching, and nausea, vomiting. So we say that Qian Xiang regulates middle jiao qi, we should say that it specifically moves it downward for the rebellious stomach qi, and it's good for cold or stagnation due to cold. And as part of its warming function, it can also warm the kidney, especially for yang deficiency related respiratory problems. So this is Not sure if we talked about this before, but this is when you breathe in air, the qi goes into the lung, and the lung is supposed to descend it, but also the kidney is supposed to reach up and grasp it. And so that's what we mean when we say yang deficiency related respiratory problems. That's when kidney yang is deficient, the kidney can't reach up and grasp the lung qi. So that's something that Chen Xiang is good for. And so notice with Chen Xiang, the dosage is a lot smaller than average. It's 1 to 1.5 grams. And this is one that you can actually take it as a single herb. You can grind it into a powder and just swallow it with warm water, but the dosage is very small. Also, again, the term xiang means aromatic. Because this one is aromatic in property, this is one that we have to add during the last 5 minutes of cooking in order to retain its aromatic property. The name Chen Xiang means sinking fragrance. So maybe that can help you remember that sinking means that this one is moving downward to treat things like nausea, vomiting, hiccup, and belching. And the xiang can let you know that it's aromatic in property. Next is Tan Xiang, Santali Alibi Lignum. Tan Xiang, this is sandalwood. So Tan Xiang also regulates qi and stops pain. It's good for moving middle jiao qi to stop abdominal pain. It also opens the chest to treat chest pain. Honestly, these last two, I'm not sure they're very common herbs, Chen Xiang and Tan Xiang. Tan Xiang, I can't think of any formulas that we learn where Tan Xiang is an ingredient. Maybe I'm not remembering well, but these aren't really common herbs. So Tan Xiang, if you remember, I might remember regulating middle jiao qi and stopping pain, but also opening the chest makes this one stand out. Dosage is also slightly smaller than average. That's Chen Xiang and Tan Xiang. And kind of finally is Chuan Lienza, Tusindon fructus. Chuan Lien Zi, Tusindon fructus. This is a seed that I think it comes from a Chinese pagoda tree, but Chuan Lienza. What we should know about this one is Chuan Lienza regulates liver qi and stops pain. But this is another one that stands out because in regulating liver qi, it's also cold in temperature. So this is especially good for liver qi stagnation with heat. Sometimes the two go together, or sometimes the liver qi stagnation, once that qi stagnates, that turns into heat. So Chuan Lienza is a very useful herb to use in that situation, but by regulating liver qi, it also has a specialty of stopping pain, and it's used in heat conditions. Chuan Lienza also has an action of killing parasites. Now remember, in Chinese medicine, when we say kill parasites, that can mean two things. That can mean real parasites like roundworm, pinworm, and tapeworm, or that can mean more like skin infections like fungal infections, tinea, athlete's foot, jock itch, things like that. Chuan Lienza does both. So Chuan Lienza can be used internally for roundworm and tapeworm. And actually here, I think Bensky has a note that Chuan Lienza is not actually good at expelling the parasites. It's just that Chuan Lienza has a good pain relieving action, and so that's why it's used in these situations. That if you have roundworm, you might have some, or tapeworm, you might have some abdominal pain. So Chuan Lienza isn't actually expelling the parasites. It's just helping with the pain that results from the parasites. However, Chuan Lienza can also be used externally for fungal infections on the scalp. I think the term we use here is tinea capitis. So a lot of times people will use the term tinea, and people will ask me, what is tinea? Tinea is a fungal infection. I think the one you're probably most familiar with is athlete's foot. That's tinea pedis. That's tinea on the foot. But turns out you can have tinea in other places as well, like in the groin, in the armpits, or in this case, on the head. So this is good for fungal infections on the head. And that's Chuan Lienza. This one, it's kind of interesting. According to the books, we say Chuan Lienza, you should crush it first. And this one, it's just kind of like, this is very difficult to crush. And so if you have a mortar and pestle, because they're very round, and so they're kind of not quite walnut size, but they're sizable and they're round. And so when you try to crush them with your mortar and pestle, it's very likely that they'll just slip and pop out. And so I've never really had much success with crushing these, but honestly, when I order this herb, it comes like the picture here, where it looks like they were sliced in half before they were dried. And so I'm assuming that if they come this way, you don't actually need to crush them. That there was one time when we ordered them and we got them the whole seed as just a round thing. And I think in that situation, you would have to crush them. But a lot of times you'll see them come like this, already broken in half. And I'm hoping that means that you don't have to crush them because they're really hard to crush. If I did have to crush them, I would probably put them in a Ziploc bag and hit them with a hammer or hit them with a rolling pin or something like that because they're very difficult to crush with a mortar and pestle. But Chuanlienza, it turns out, also goes by the name Jinlingza, which means little golden bell or golden bell seed. And so that just comes up. We do have one formula that is called Jinlingza-san. So in that one, you would probably want to remember that Jinlingza is just another name for Chuanlienza. And so it's very good for moving liver qi. It's very good for stopping pain, but especially moving liver qi during heat conditions. So that's Chuanlienza. Next, we have a few herbs that, at least when I was in school, these were not on the syllabus, but maybe that's changed. Maybe you have to learn them or maybe you don't. But it turns out that these are on the NCCAOM herb list. So if you're studying for nationals, you probably want to take a look at these herbs. The first one here is Xie Bai Ali Macrostemi bulbus. Xie Bai Ali Macrostemi bulbus. This is Chinese chives or Chinese garlic. So I think what we need to know about Xie Bai is that it unblocks the qi and disperses phlegm, and is especially for chest bee due to cold phlegm. Basically, when we get to formulas, we'll learn a formula called Gualo Xie Bai Bai Jiutong, and this is the only formula we learn where Xie Bai is an ingredient, and it turns out that that is a formula for chest bee or chest impediment due to qi stagnation and phlegm. So if you remember one thing about Xie Bai, I would remember chest bee due to qi stagnation and phlegm. We also say descends qi and reduces stagnation for diarrhea or dysentery with tenesmus due to damp stagnation in the large intestine, kind of similar to what we talked about with Mu Xiang. But again, for Xie Bai, if you remember one thing, I would remember chest bee. Next is Fuo Shou Citri Sarcodactylus fructus. Fuo Shou Citri Sarcodactylus fructus. This one regulates qi and kind of regulates all of the qi. So we say it regulates liver qi for ribside pain and stifling sensation in the chest. It regulates middle jiao qi for epigastric pain, poor appetite, belching, and vomiting. And then it also transforms phlegm and stop cough for enduring cough with copious phlegm. So when we talked about all the systems where we can regulate qi, Fuo Shou kind of covers all of them. I'm just not sure it's especially strong. For example, in transforming phlegm and stopping cough, we say enduring cough, that if you had an acute cough with phlegm, Fuo Shou is just not strong enough, so we'd go to other herbs. But if you had an enduring cough, then maybe we can use Fuo Shou. But it turns out Fuo Shou, this herb does not appear as an ingredient in any of the formulas that we learn. So it might still be nice to know. You might still see it in your clinic. I had a coworker who used this very often for liver overacting on spleen, that basically whenever he made xiaoyaosan, he would just, as a rule, add in Fuo Shou because it's good for liver qi stagnation and middle jiao qi stagnation. But in terms of the formulas that we learn, Fuo Shou is not ever an ingredient. The name is kind of interesting. Fuo means Buddha, so this is Buddha's hand. If you look at a picture of this, it's like a lemon with fingers, so it's kind of a funny looking lemony thing. But again, it's a citrus thing. It's very common for citrusy things to regulate qi, like tangerines and bitter oranges and Buddha's hand. So that's Fuo Shou. And finally, we have Mei Gui Hua, Rosei Rugosei floss. Mei Gui Hua is rosebud or Chinese rosebud. And this is another one that it regulates liver qi and middle jiao qi, and it's especially good for liver overacting on spleen. So we could say it harmonizes the liver and spleen stomach for a stifling sensation in the chest, belching, ribside pain, and poor appetite due to either liver overacting on spleen or liver overacting on stomach. Sometimes when the liver gets angry, we say it attacks horizontally. So liver qi stagnation can lead to spleen stomach qi stagnation, and then that qi can start to rebel back upward. So that's what we're dealing with here. It also gently regulates qi in blood. So for irregular menses, like when we're talking about breast tenderness due to qi stagnation in the liver channel, very common to happen before a period, and painful menses. So again, Meiguihua, Chinese rosebud, as far as I know, this does not appear in any of the formulas that we learn, but it's something that maybe you'll add it in as a modification. Or I have a friend that she likes to make teas for people, that there are certain patients that they just don't like to take Chinese herbal formulas, that they don't like to cook them for a long time, and it smells bad and tastes even worse. And so sometimes for those patients, she'll make some custom teas, and Meiguihua is a very common ingredient that you can just add to a tea. So that's our category of herbs that regulate qi. And what I like to do here is just to introduce a few formulas just to give some context to these herbs. This is not meant to be a formula class, but sometimes when you see these herbs in isolation, it's hard to get a sense of what they actually do. So we'll just introduce a few formulas and talk about how these herbs can be used as ingredients in these formulas and what types of conditions they treat. So our first one here we talked about before is Archentong, 2-aged herb decoction. Archentong, 2-aged decoction. And this one is for phlegm dampness in the spleen and or lung. So you see things like cough with copious white, easy to expectorate sputum, focal distension and stifling sensation in the chest and diaphragm, palpitation and nausea and vomiting, as in rebellious qi. The tongue is going to have a greasy coat. The pulse is going to be slippery because of the phlegm. And so here the two main ingredients are two herbs that we've learned in the semester. So Ban Sha was in the category transform phlegm. It transforms cold phlegm. And then Chen Pi, aged tangerine peel, is the one that we just learned in this category. So these two herbs are very commonly used together because, remember, both of them have an action of transforming phlegm. Ban Sha comes from the transform phlegm category, but Chen Pi, we also said it enters both the lung and the spleen channel, and it dries dampness and transforms phlegm. And then remember that both of these also have a downward direction. That Ban Sha, we said, is very good for redirecting rebellious stomach qi downward for nausea, vomiting, and morning sickness. Chen Pi also has that bitter flavor that it sends things downward. So it's very common to use these two herbs together also for that nausea and vomiting. So here's an example of where we're using Chen Pi specifically to deal with phlegm damp, because it does have that action. Besides regulating qi, it kind of does a lot of good stuff for the spleen. Another one is Chai Hu Shugan San, Blue Plurum powder to dredge the liver. Chai Hu Shugan San, so we use the term dredge the liver. That's kind of the term we use for one of the actions of the liver, that it dredges and drains the channels, as in opening them up, so that the free flow of qi can occur. So this one is for liver qi constraint. Here Bensky is using that word constraint, qi yi. So we have flank pain, stifling sensation in the chest, because the liver channel goes to the chest and the rib sides. And we kind of make a note here that usually the way this manifests as in deep sighing or difficulty taking a breath. You usually don't have a patient that comes in and says, "Oh, I have a stifling sensation in the chest." Usually what will happen is there's qi stagnating in this area, so it's difficult for them to take a deep breath, or they'll have frequent deep sighing, like they're trying to expand their chest and move qi through the liver channel. Suppressed emotions and feelings of frustration and anger, again, emotional things, can be due to liver qi stagnation. Then abdominal distension and fullness. Pulse is going to be wiry, indicating stagnation. And what's interesting here is the chief herb is actually Chai Hu. It's not even from this category. If you remember back in the very beginning in cool acrid herbs that release the exterior, we learned Chai Hu, blue pluriradix, that it's good for Shaoyang disorder, but it also has an action of moving liver qi. So it turns out that a lot of our formulas for liver qi stagnation are actually based on Chai Hu. So that's another one that we've learned that regulates qi. But then notice that we have a lot of other of our herbs that we learned here. So Zhike, the bitter orange, the ripe bitter orange. Xiangfu cyperrhizoma is especially good for liver qi stagnation. And then we also have Chen Pi here as well. So remember, Zhike is kind of more of a spleen stomach herb, but we said that Zhike has this action of expanding the chest. So that might be why we're using it here for this stifling sensation in the chest, that we said Zhike has an action of opening the chest. Xiangfu, very good for moving liver qi. It's also neutral in temperature, so a lot of times liver qi stagnation turns into heat, but here Chai Hu Bai Shao are cool in temperature. Xiangfu is not going to cause those heat signs. Then we add in some Chen Pi. It's very common, like we said, when the liver qi stagnates, it can attack horizontally and cause stomach problems. So we have things like belching and abdominal distension and fullness. That liver qi has caused some middle jiao qi stagnation as well. So we use some Chen Pi, aged tangerine peel, to help with those symptoms as well. So here's an example of regulating qi with these herbs. This is the formula we talked about, Gualo Sheibai Baijiutong. I think this is a very fun one to say. And this is for chest bee or painful obstruction in the chest. So pain in the chest that often radiates to the upper back. We can have wheezing and cough with copious sputum. And so here the two herbs are gualo, trichosanthus fruit. This is an herb that we learned in the phlegm heat category. Gualo, besides transforming phlegm heat, remember it's sweet in flavor, it makes the phlegm thinner and easier to expectorate. But we also said that gualo has an action of unbinding the chest or expanding the chest for chest bee. And that's what we're using it for here, in combination with xie bai, which also unblocks the qi, transforms phlegm, and is good for chest bee. So as far as I know, this is the only formula where xie bai presents. So again, if you remember one thing about xie bai, I would remember chest bee. Jinlingza-san Melia Tusandan powder. This is the one that we said that, remember we said that Chuan Lienza also goes by the name Jinlingza, golden bell seed. And so this is the one time that comes up. We learn one formula called Jinlingza-san, and this is for liver qi constraint transforming into heat. And so that's basically what we said that Chuan Lienza was good for. Chuan Lienza's specialty is that it moves qi, it stops pain, but it's also cold in temperature. So it's good for liver qi transforming into heat. So intermittent epigastric and hypochondriac pain, hernial pain, or menstrual pain that is aggravated by the ingestion of hot food or drink. So we have those are liver qi stagnation signs, but we say they're worse when you eat hot things or drink hot things. So that's how we know that it's a heat condition. Accompanied by irritability and a bitter taste in the mouth. Again, the liver has to do with anger and irritability. Bitter taste in the mouth is a very Shaoyang thing. The tongue is red with a yellow coat, red because of heat, yellow coat because of heat. The pulse is wiry, rapid because of the stagnation, rapid because of the heat. And there we use Chuan Lienza because it moves liver qi, but it's also cold in temperature. So this is the perfect herb for this situation. So that's an example of using Chuan Lienza. Tiantai Wu Yao San, top quality Lindra powder. Tiantai Wu Yao San, this formula has Wu Yao in the name. So Tiantai Wu Yao San is good for Shan disorder or hernia pain due to qi stagnation with cold in the liver channel. So lower abdominal pain radiating the testicles or swollen and distended testicles. Again, the liver channel goes up the leg, it goes to the inguinal area, and we say it wraps around the external genitalia. So if we have cold stagnation in the liver channel, these are some of the symptoms that may present. And kind of the point here is maybe you're not learning formulas yet, but it turns out we have a formula with Wu Yao in the name, and that formula is good for Shan disorder. Probably means it's important to know that Wu Yao is good for Shan disorder. So remember, Wu Yao regulates middle jiao qi, regulates liver qi, and it's warm in temperature. So it moves qi through the liver channel, but also warms the channel for this Shan disorder due to cold. But then notice we also have some other herbs that we learned here. Mu Xiang, we said it moves qi, but it's also good for stopping pain. So that's maybe why it's here. When we said Mu Xiang is, I think of it more of a spleen stomach herb, but this is an example where we might say it's moving liver qi instead. Qing Pi is green peel. This is the green tangerine peel. So it's green in color. Green is the color of the liver. So it's good for moving liver qi. for our Shan disorder. And then Chuan Lienza, again, we said is good for moving liver qi. And this one, it kind of doesn't match the temperature, but I think we have enough other warm herbs in here that we're using Chuan Lienza because it's good for moving liver qi and stopping pain. Not necessarily because of its temperature, but because of its pain relieving quality. So again, these are some situations where we might use herbs that regulate qi, and I kind of just use this to emphasize that Wu Yao is good for Shan disorder or hernia pain. So those are just some formulas that maybe helps give some context to these herbs. If we want to do a review, here we have a list of the herbs. If you have the notes and you print them out, these two slides I think are on one page. So what I might say is if you're reviewing these, first I would go through and make sure you know which ones are better for middle jiao qi stagnation and which ones are better for liver qi stagnation, or which ones are good for both. But first separate it out by what type of qi does it regulate. Number two, I might go through and look at which ones are warm in temperature versus cold in temperature. So the majority of these are warm, but we have some that are neutral in temperature, like Xiangfu, and then some that are cold in temperature, like Chuan Lienza. So that might be another important thing to know, is separate these out by temperature. And then just start to look at what are their specialties, or what other things do they do. So Chen Pi is also good for dampness and phlegm. Jurka opening the chest, Dafu Pi makes you pee, and we get to the other ones. Shangfu, its specialty is in menstruation issues. Mu Shang, especially good for stopping pain. Wu Yao, it's very warm, it's good for Shan disorder. Chen Shang, Tan Xiang, I think there's like one formula where one of these come up, so I just remember it regulates qi, and Tanxiang opens the chest. I think we have one formula with Tanxiang in it. Chuan Lienza, definitely remember it regulates qi. It's good for stopping pain, and it's cold in temperature. So those are the kind of things I would look for as you're going through. This is a little bit larger category, so make sure you can separate these by what kind of qi they're regulating, what's the temperature, and then either what's their specialty in regulating qi or what other things they would do. So those are the things I would look at when reviewing herbs that regulate qi. So that's our category, herbs that regulate the qi. Thanks for sticking with me on this one. It's kind of a long one, but like we said before, these are videos that kind of go into a lot of detail about each herb. This is really good if you're taking an herbs class and you want to follow along with your weekly lecture. These videos go into a lot of detail. If you're reviewing for finals or year ends or your board exams, it could be that you don't want to go into this much detail when you're reviewing a large volume of information. So if you're studying for those big tests, you can also take a look at the herb review courses. There's a single herb review course that goes through all of the single herbs and just touches on the main points of each herb, so it's a good way to quickly review. And then there's also a formula review course that goes over all the formulas on the NCCAOM list, and so that's a good way to review all the formulas. But as we go through each formula, we talk about the single herbs in each formula and the Dui Yao pairs in each formula, so it's a good way to review formulas, Dui Yao pairs, and single herbs all at the same time. So if you're studying for finals or year ends or board, you should check those out as well. There are links to those below. But thanks for being here. This is a long one. I can tell my voice is getting kind of scratchy. So thank you for being here. We'll see you in the next one, which is herbs that regulate blood. I think starting with herbs that stop bleeding. So thanks for being here. We'll see you in the next one.